the next thing we're doing
Joe,
is...
hi. How pleasant to see you at this time of night.
I'm wide awake.
I bet you're happy to be here too.
So we're going to take a look at... Huh? We're going to take a look at...
People in the back row would like to sit in the front row.
I think they're comfortable.
You scare us. You scare us.
We do.
We like buffers.
And it's not even Halloween. All right, so let's talk about the possible zoning bylaw amendment for the tavern and library. One thing that came out at last night's CPC meeting is that we don't absolutely have a gun to our head that have to draft the bylaw by Friday. The warrant apparently closes on the 9th, is it 8th? So it gives us a little bit of time. We don't have to make a decision on everything tonight and ratify it on Friday, which I couldn't do anyway. But one thought that I had, and I passed this along to Joel earlier, is one of the things I don't like to do is to write a zoning bylaw for one lot. It's not that it's spot zoning. I'm not concerned about that. But it's just that you don't tailor. But the bylaw is supposed to be a general document that covers a class of use in construction, and then to drill down on one lot and say this is special all by itself is kind of an issue for me. So one thing I was thinking about doing is actually using the ARD bylaw, which is an overlay district, as a model for something that we might describe as a historic structures preservation district. And maybe include in that more than just this property. And let me just say, first of all, let me ask the question. Is the old library and the tavern, are they on one parcel or two parcels?
My understanding is there are two parcels.
They're on two parcels. So already we've got an overlay district that covers two parcels with two different kinds of use, right? One is solely residential, the other one's mixed use. We're going to address that. The other thing I was thinking about is the Fisk Law Office, because the Fisk Law Office currently is in a residential zone. And a residential zone only allows a limited number of non-residential uses. And the town is actually attempting to lease that building for general office use. It's not a permitted use in a residential zone. And
I'm also seeing the old North Ave fire station is another potential
possibility. There are other possibilities, but I'm just thinking about these for now. But if the Fisk Law Office were in this historic structures preservation district, then we could include general office as a use, with a special permit in that district, and limit this. So those are considerations. The other consideration I had is that is with respect to parking, because maybe if we use the ARD as a model, we could pull all of the kinds of steps that we're talking about in general terms under the umbrella of this overlay district, including parking as part of the consideration. And that might get us out of the parking conundrum that we're in now with respect to the current program on the tavern parcel. And the conundrum is that we're committed to a limited parking lot, but we're talking about we're talking about 160 seats if you include both the community league function space and the restaurant, plus plus whatever staff is involved with those two functions, plus the bed and breakfast or whatever that turns out to be, plus the historical society parking, whatever that turns out to be. And if you run the rough numbers, you're looking at parking requirements in the vicinity of maybe 40, 50, 55 cars, something like that. It's going to depend on the traffic calculations. But if it's a 20-car parking lot and you're only allowed to park in the business districts within 200 feet of the property, counting cars from the corner of the old library to past the fire station to Center Street, there are a total of 20 cars on that, 20 parking spaces on that side of the street. So either there's a shortfall of somewhere between 10 and 20 cars, at least as far as I can figure out, and you can either handle that with more parking on site, valet parking, or some other scheme, or you could say, in this district, if you can prove up the parking density, if you can show that you can park the requisite number of cars on site and on the street within 200 feet in the district, in the business zone, then part of the special permit process would be to allow parking in other locations in the town center as a way to increase or limit the impact on the site and on abutters. You follow me? Mm-hmm. I mean, these are all thoughts that I've had about this zoning bylaw change. And the ARD just sort of framework would let us plug in stuff like that. Those are my thoughts. Mm-hmm. So I just throw that out there.
So the purpose is to be able to basically, when a historic structure is being repurposed for commercial use, to be able to have the authority to adapt or be flexible with the parking regulations. Is that correct? Yeah.
One of the purposes.
Okay. And would it be better to word it in that way rather than as a district which has geographic boundaries, because it's specifically for the idea of preserving the function and use of buildings which need more care.
It's an overlay.
I understand that's what you're
overlays
talking about.
an underlying district, and so it takes care of the
I understand that. I'm just wondering whether it's better to, as a bylaw, to have a bylaw that gives flexibility for these kinds of uses.
No, I don't want to create a new zone because the uses here are so different from what we typically. Yes.
I'm not talking about a new zone.
Well, what are you talking about?
I'm talking about a recognized circumstance where you have historic buildings which you want to be able to preserve their ability to function and to stay viable.
Okay,
all right.
It's the
in
same
those,
thing.
no, I think it gets to the same end. But am I going down the wrong tree this way? Do you have any idea what I'm talking about?
I'm still waiting to hear more. But yeah.
Okay. All right. Well,
so far so good.
Right. I mean, I'm thinking of as an old overlay district puts in geographic boundaries, and I think the purpose here, and it's for whether we're talking about, the North Road fire station, whether we're talking about the Fisk, office building, whether we're talking whichever historic building owned by the town that we are repurposing for commercial use, that we should have flexibility in terms of meeting the requirements such as parking.
I don't know what you're saying. Are you saying that there's
a different kind of bylaw, an adjustment to the bylaw, basically?
But is it a different zone? Is it a sort of? I mean, in the case of the tavern and library, the town is selling it. So it wouldn't be town-owned.
Town-owned anymore.
So...
No,
I'm just saying.
This sounds more convoluted than I think it needs to be, but maybe I'm wrong. I mean,
No, I mean.
Well, do you have a copy of the art in front of you? In your zoning? Because that's kind of an interesting thing. I mean, if you just it's on page 36 in the zoning bylaws, which of course you keep in your back pocket.
yeah,
Correct.
no, I know, but.
I keep it on my iPad.
But I have a friend here who has one over here.
And I can see what you're talking about, Alan. So this is just such a very specific bylaw. And
No. You use it as a framework.
Right, you use it. Right, you change it over. I mean, it's completely. This is alien to what we would be using, but I like the framework. You're right.
You define it.
Yeah,
the
you define it
purposes,
right. You the whole thing.
But I don't know if minimum tract size applies or doesn't.
Right.
There's
There's a lot of it that doesn't apply. Obviously, you just really, but you create this very specific. The only thing is with saying historic structures preservation district, I would think that private homeowners might lose it on this.
Well-
that you might want to say town-owned historic structures or some kind of way to pull it out of the general population.
Under the basic provisions, what it takes to be in this district,
Right.
this overlay district,
Right.
you could stipulate that the property has to be, first of all, declared historically significant by the
Right.
Historical Commission.
Okay.
Second of all, have preservation deed
Should I
restriction.
be writing down frantically?
No, preservation deed restriction held by the town.
Right.
And town owned at the time that the property was included in the overlay district.
Okay.
Can I make a suggestion? It may not be necessary right now to focus on whether or not it's town-owned or not. I mean, clearly that's what's being discussed, but for purposes of refining the model, I mean, it's occurring to me there may be properties that are not town-owned that you may want to include in this. In other words, I'm being sort of neutral on that issue. Maybe we need to focus on the town-owned aspect, while certainly wanting...
I'm thinking about how to get it by town meeting.
Yeah, that may be a practical consideration, or it could be privately owned, but then subject to the kinds of restrictions that Al's talking about. And that's what made me think about it. In other words, whether it's town-owned or not, in any event, what I'm saying is that can be an issue that could be added in, less of a focus, I think.
It's a political question, I think.
I understand, yeah. Well, that's fine.
But you see his
Can work
point. I
that
mean,
way.
it's
Yeah.
looking at the wording and sort of the structure and the art in the zoning bylaws. I can see where that makes sense. I mean, it's basically constructing our own private room.
So,
Ideal.
Pardon?
It's constructing our own
Right,
ideal
it's not
zoning.
arbitrary zoning. In
Right.
other words, it's
Right.
not as a kind of
Yeah, but
methodology.
also we have the ability to add so many little purposes to be so clear about what we're doing.
Right.
Right, and there's also a timing issue in here which I like, and that is that, for example, let's say you stipulate something like a certain, anything over a minimum minimum occupancy, let's say occupancy 15, then you start going through the concept plan idea. You know what I'm saying? So you don't have to have a concept plan for a single-use building with a population under 15, which means that the fiscal office would be excluded from the concept plan thing, but that the concept plan would apply to the old library and the tavern. That then allows the town to make a decision about the project before the developer has to go through every hoop in the application process. You develop a concept plan, you send that to town meeting, it's up or down, do you like the concept plan or not? And then if the town meeting says yes, then the developer can go forward for the special permit application in detail.
although I must say my experience with analogs to this kind of bylaw is that the developer is, just to get the concept plan developed and ready for prime time, because town meeting is prime time, to get the concept plan approved. They've really jumped through most of those hoops already.
Not at all.
Then there's certainly a level of greater detail, but I mean,
Oh,
for instance.
no. The R didn't work that way at all. we went through the concept plan idea. I mean, I only mention this example because we've done it.
Mm-hmm.
We know what was required for the concept plan, and we know what was required for the follow-up detailed plans that got us to construction. So
Right, clearly that's a whole other level of detail, so surely there are a lot more of those hoops, but there's a lot of preliminary work, I guess, that involves many, many hoops, and you're just talking obviously about a much finer level of detail that follows.
Well, I was worried about the timing, because in this case, nothing happens if we don't have a bylaw in place for Springtown meeting. But on the other hand, we're not going to have because the planning board has actually never seen the project. We're actually, or at least not in any kind of.
It's true, it was on tentative for tonight.
That we're trying to craft a bylaw before we've seen a project. And so what I was thinking is, if we craft a bylaw that says, look, you're voting for funding the project in principle at Springtown meeting. Then if we don't have enough submittal from the applicant by Springtown meeting, it doesn't mean it's the end of the world, because the applicant has to come back to Falltown meeting with a concept plan that gets voted up or down. So that's not ideal in terms of what Cameron has told us for a schedule, but it's the only way I could figure out to make it work. If he has enough by Springtown meeting, if he can satisfy the concept plan goals by Springtown meeting, then we could do both at once. We could vote this in, vote the money, and vote the concept plan. Or if he doesn't make the deadline, then at least we have the bylaw in place, and we have an up or down vote on the money, and he can go forward until the fall. Do you follow what I'm saying? I'm trying to solve the scheduling conundrum. It's the only way I could figure out to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it would be possible, if it helped the schedule, to have a special town meeting in September.
We could.
As opposed to late November or early December, too. So.
Sure, why not?
You have that power? Oh, you're a selectman, I forgot.
Yeah. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I don't have any language on it. I just had some thoughts. Is it worth pursuing in your view, or?
Certainly, yeah. I mean, obviously there are several ways to skin this cat, and this certainly has the advantage, as you've said, of it being a proven model that's in the zoning bylaw, a proven model, and that it's been implemented once or more than once.
Or it's only been once.
So at least it's got that track record.
But I think most people are happy with how that came out. I haven't heard any complaints.
Yeah.
No. And it's recent, so it's well within the memory of
Right.
the town.
Mm-hmm.
And so that there's some level of trust.
And this
on
would,
that process.
Al, this would permit flexibility in use between residential, commercial, office.
Yeah, we have to drill down on what the acceptable uses were, and the standards and criteria for judging what an appropriate development plan would be. And we'd have to get into the details. If the concept works, we can, as Joel says, we can get into, start to focus in on all that stuff.
And I would think, and these are policy considerations, they're not for me to decide, but I would think you'd initially want to be more open about it than limited about it. Because really the objective, and I like the title you came up with, Historic Structures Preservation Districts. The objective is to preserve historic structures and make them useful again. And so really depending on where they're located, any kind of use, not necessarily imaginable right now, might suggest itself for that location, that building, that period in time, or whatever it might be. So there might be some benefit to having criteria that might help you decide. And obviously, chief among the criteria would be what are the neighboring uses, or what are the uses that are in character with the neighborhood, that sort of thing.
Exactly.
And that would define it.
Yeah.
And so.
You wouldn't want a Colonial gas station, would you?
Yeah,
Colonial
but
gas station in Harbor Square, and work for you.
But I think that's a great point when you think that we rezoned the library from residential to commercial, and now we're stuck having, now that's catching us, biting us again. So let's give us the flexibility to deal with these kinds of properties, and consistent with the context.
Right.
Yeah.
The other thing I was thinking, by the way, just to throw this in, is that if this is two parcels, and the septic systems are on the separate parcels, and let's say we say that a minimum population requires, in order to trigger the concept plan is, say, 15 or 20.
So the library might be.
It may be all small enough.
No, because the tavern,
restaurant.
no, the tavern you're never going to make work.
Right.
But it could be that the library could be phased first because it wouldn't need that in and of itself wouldn't need to have to be approved at town meeting as under a concept plan scheme. So now you're just reviewing the tavern uses at town meeting. I don't know if that would be helpful or not. I just pointed out as a possible consideration.
Well, yeah, I mean, it would be, as we heard last night, we have repairs that we want to, one way or another, we want to be starting repair work on the library before the snow flies. And so potentially having the possibility of putting that on an accelerated timeline, I think, could be beneficial. So,
Is the long-range plan to get rid of that property line in any event? Because I understand the whole thing's going to be condo, but is that the property line?
it would be, I think I know what is anticipated is to have two different condo associations, one associated with each building. So the issue right now is that the plans are calling for a single septic. Evidently, there's the possibility of separate septics, but that may be the point of where they stay conjoined.
But we don't know that yet.
Yeah.
Rob Jemmett did a pretty thorough PERG analysis. I mean, he issued a whole report about 3 years ago.
Yeah, I had only heard about that possibility recently, so maybe the Cameron's well aware of that.
I don't know. I mean, it's out there because we got that. I have the report at home on my computer, so it exists. I know.
Yeah.
And the only question was whether the potential leach field in front of the library would be large enough to handle the number of bedrooms.
Right. But at 3 units, the number of bedrooms is
Pretty small.
fairly small.
7, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the
So,
case.
Joel, what do you think in general? I mean, is this a good line to pursue?
Oh, absolutely.
Or
Yes,
have you got other things that we need to hear before we take off on this?
When we say the things that you need to hear,
Well,
mean,
like
there-
other examples that other towns have done, or
Well, I think conceptually, this kind of idea is the way most towns handle it. In other words, it's, it falls either, this is sort of, what communities call it planned development districts. I mean, they're districts that you define around particular specific objectives, in this case, preserving specific buildings. I mean, another approach, and the one that I had sort of begun to mock up, was more site-specific, as Al was alluding to at the outset, that was an overlay district for just those two buildings. And that is another way that a lot of other communities would approach it when they have a site-specific objective. And so you do see towns whose zoning maps look a lot like Weston's, but you'll see a couple of areas that have separate treatment that are there because of a particular activity or attraction. For instance, out in Lunenburg, which is whose zoning is even less detailed, if you will. Their zoning map less detailed. And yours was that old Whalen Park, if you ever went there. And Whalen Park, or kids, whatever it was, it closed some number of years ago. It's an amusement park, and it got sold and is now a quite dense residential complex. So it is its own little zoning district, and the footprint actually is surprisingly small when you remember, gee, all of the things that were there. It's actually pretty small. So that's an example that's more like a zoning overlay district
So
for the tavern.
towns would have to address every single situation that came up. With a new overlay district, they would always be forced into writing a new overlay district to apply to a specific event or place.
Well, I guess my response would be that it's not as if those kinds of site-specific situations arise with such frequency. So when they do, you can treat it that way. I'm just saying it's another model. I mean, it's the only one I'm familiar with in Lunenburg, for instance. I've been working with them for 15 years. But so when a particular site, a particular development opportunity presents itself, that's another way to deal with it. And it is, to answer your question, another way that communities deal with it.
But it just deals with that one thing.
It does.
Right.
Right. It does. It's
And
a
it can't be-
site-specific response.
One thing with the ARD model is after you do the concept, then the level of, just the level of detail really is drawn out. It makes it quite easy for whoever has to administer this
Right.
to follow those details rather than come up with, the process.
And when there are changes,
Yeah,
we're right on top of them.
right.
Look at Mark Romanowitz. We're keeping tabs on that project
Right.
every step of the way, and
Yeah, and it's
it's a way
very
to-
successful.
So that's
So that's the big
the
thing
advantage.
on this.
Right.
So a lot more work
This
at
is
the beginning, maybe, in constructing the bylaw, because you have to think of everything and you always forget something. But,
Well, and actually, that's an advantage of working from this existing bylaw, is that a lot of thought went into it.
A lot of
and
thought.
Presumably, you went through it
Took us
once.
6
and
months to write
it
that.
turned out there weren't
gray
any
hair, did you see
oversights.
his gray hair? He had dark black hair when I met him. It's amazing.
No, it really did. It took us 6 months to do it.
Wonders.
Yeah.
All right.
And we don't have 6 months now.
No, we
That's
don't.
the other thing. We're
We have how many
God.
days? 12? 14 working
Well,
days?
not only that, but I mean, on the good news is we don't have to do it tomorrow.
Mm.
But the bad news is we don't have much time after the closing for public airing of what we're doing. So we're going to get slammed on either now or later.
Realistically, I mean, it really does mean that in terms of the project, that it's unlikely that collectively we'd all be able to pull this bylaw together and simultaneously be ready to get the project through the first phase that the bylaw describes. So it really does mean a trip to a future town meeting rather than this one, from the zoning point.
Well, we
Because there is-
maybe, I mean, but it would mean dropping every other thing. We'd have to focus on this for the next, 5 weeks in order to make that happen. This is to become our job.
Would this have to be reviewed at the Attorney General level as well?
The
Yeah.
bylaw? Well, of course, yeah. But
So that's good.
But the bylaw becomes effective when voted by town meeting, and the Attorney General's approval happens over the next 3 months. And it's their approval or their disapproval is retroactive. So it would take effect immediately. As a the town meeting vote, but subject to that review. But obviously, there's a major leg up there working from a model that's in place. in terms of that.
What should we do, Joel? I mean, would you feel comfortable taking a crack at a first draft on this and shipping it back to maybe Joe and me, and we can give you our feedback, or how would you like to do it?
Well, I feel comfortable as a matter of legal form. There'd be so much policy, there'd be so many policy type decisions that would have to be made. I wouldn't feel comfortable taking a crack at that. I could send you something back with a lot of blanks that,
That would be fine.
yeah.
Blanks are okay.
Just an outline of it.
Yes,
Well, it would be more than
something
that, because, I mean, if you look,
something
there's
to
a
work
lot
with.
of, there's a lot of procedure here that we would just repeat. But, I mean, I think we touched on some of the key issues. Certainly parking, for instance, parking heading in blank.
Yeah. That's gonna be a
and
big one.
Some ideas, but then also the kinds of criteria to identify.
Phasing.
The historic structures preservation district, that'd be easy enough, I guess, generically to talk, what is a historic structure, and a lot of other criteria you can draw from there, but even there, and then.
For me, one of the thoughts would be, I mean, in addition to parking, one of the things that concerned me would be, in a situation like this, where it's all new construction, and it's one use, it's housing for a certain group, it's not going to change complexion over time. It's, 20 years from now, 25 years from now, it's still going to be housing for one group. In the same thing would probably be true of the fiscal law office, but over here, the complexion could change. I mean, it could start, just take an example, the restaurant is going to start out as a wonderful 4-star restaurant that everybody, will have to take out mortgages to pay for, but, the meal at, but at least you could, you're going to get an enjoyable meal there, and you're going to get a certain ambience. 20 years from now, what we want to guard against is seeing Subway over there.
Right.
How do we do that? How do we go through the special permit process so that the town has some control over the kinds of activities that occur there? It's not enough to say it's an eating place. It could be any eating place. So how can we manage issues like that? I think those kinds of questions are going to involve a lot of thought and discussion, because you don't want to. It's a private business, so you can't control it too much, especially since you have no legal standing besides the special permit process.
So that's where you do it. I mean, there are communities, for instance, that regulate fast food, or they define fast food and exclude it entirely. I mean, I think, but so there's going to be a dividing line, a point at which the bylaw itself will cut off in terms of level of detail, and then the finer level of details you look to the special permit to regulate, to address.
Right.
Obviously, those are the kinds of decisions we'll be doing April 6th, I should say, before the 8th. That will be in a later revision.
Yeah.
Because the specific example of the nature of the restaurant, I don't know if you get into that level of detail in the bylaw, but maybe have some general standards. That I don't know. I mean, those are the kinds of considerations.
I don't know how else we get into it
for the board.
I mean, if it's not tied to the special permit, what standing do we have at all?
Right. I guess the question is, what ends up being a special permit decision versus a bylaw decision? And that, by the way, ratchets up to the higher level of detail, and that is going to be special permit review or site plan review.
Special permit review.
Okay.
Special permit review, no question about it. Planning board is a review authority. No question. Oh, no, I wouldn't do site plan review on this site. Just shoot me now.
I was already planning on, because thinking that we had a Friday deadline, blocking out tomorrow and Thursday for working on this. So I don't know if, well, I don't know if you, I'm not saying for a deadline. I'm just saying I already prepared myself to devote a significant amount of time over the next 2 days on this. Do you want me to take a stab and then share it with both of you first, or at least you can get a day's head start, since it may take Joel a little bit of time to shift work around.
Okay.
That does make sense.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, right.
You can do an outline.
Yeah.
It's basically just being able to reduce the art to concepts.
Yeah, well, we have to identify the Waldos.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. I mean, I think, I'll pick a random number, 70 or 80% of what's in here will be largely reusable, and it's a matter of identifying the areas that we'll focus on.
Yeah. Okay. That's a plan. And we don't have to have the final bylaw carved in granite by April the 9th. All we need it to do is define the four corners of the bylaw so that we don't wind up later going, oh my God, we should have included that, but it's beyond the scope of the draft. That's what we want to be sure to do by April the 9th.
And there are two ways of doing that, and I don't know what the comfort level is been historically in town, but one is to have the detailed final bylaw as close as you can get it by April 8th, but obviously that would be a challenge. The other is to have something that's maybe this long or a little longer that says something like to see if the town will vote to adopt a new section or to amend the zoning bylaw by adding a new section, thus and such, letter J, called the Historic Structures Preservation District, which section shall include the following, and then shall include among the following certain criteria, not criteria, certain descriptors, whatever I'm trying to say,
It's like
giving some sense of what the content of the bylaw will be. So people will have an idea and describe, again, in another of those short phrases, that there'd be a concept plan approved by town meeting, a special permit by the planning board, that sort of thing.
that's just rolling off your tongue. I think we'll let you to write that. Yeah.
So that would be, and that buys a few weeks. That means that people don't get to see, well, they'll certainly have the detailed bylaw by the time you have your planning board public hearing, which would presumably be
Pretty shortly there.
But rather than Al's four corners, that's putting out a big, fairly broad umbrella that gives flexibility,
Right.
but adequate notice.
right.
Of
And
what-
flexibility is the key, so that
Yeah.
in terms of the scope of the article question, there'll be none, because it'll be broad enough that pretty much anything we come up with will be within that scope.
Okay, well,
So that's good. So you're going to actually create this scope
Right.
of the article.
Yeah. Okay.
sounds like you could do that in 5 minutes, so maybe
Yeah.
we'll be further along than that.
That's
Yeah.
I
why
hope we're
he's-
further along than that by the
Yeah.
8th.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you'll have some thoughts as to what some of the little descriptions will be, but, the idea being to give people a sense of what we're talking about.
All right. Anybody else have any comments or questions, observations? Nobody? Okay.
Should we ask Joel if he's available to meet with us on April 2nd? That would be our next meeting for
Sure.
making sure that we...
Oh, no, I think I'll bring my bag in here. We'll run out to the car.
You don't have your calendar with
I
you?
do, it's just out my car.
Oh,
I
okay.
can get it.
We can read minutes then.
Okay, so we're done? All right, let me just
Great.
finish my
Thank
notes
you.
myself.
Okay.
Thank you both.
What day week's the second? Is it Tuesday?
That's Tuesday.
First Tuesday.
Yeah. And when's town meeting again? May what?